Harlan County, Kentucky is basically known for two things: coal and violence. Hollywood has exploited Harlan's dark history with hit TV shows like Justified and bad movies such as Harlan County War. The true stories of these coal wars and the violence of this beautiful land are steeped in tradition and in some cases fiction. That history starts around 1931, when the situation in Harlan County among coal miners reached a critical mass, and the UMWA refused to help thousands of coal miners. So they had a choice: either succumb to starvation or bow to the coal operator. And in some cases, it was both. The situation was so dire in Harlan County that it was quickly becoming a crime against humanity, and in today's world, it would have been categorized as such. And before you start singing "Which Side Are You On?", you better know where that song came from. It meant something in 1931, and it means something now, and it's not what you think. To me, that song is not an enduring anthem of coal-field resistance. It's propaganda by the National Miners Union, or the NMU, a communist union working under the command of the Red International of Labor Unions and an organization called Communist International. And the author of that song, Florence Reece, her husband Sam Reece, was an organizer for the Communist National Miners Union. In 1931, UMW President John L. Lewis refused to get involved in Harlan County, fearing a massive strike. But this action, along with the desperate situation in Harlan, spawned a true violent coal miner resistance movement that led to the infiltration of communist unions in Harlan County. The presence of communist unions in Harlan County led to a strange pseudo-partnership between the shooters, bombers, and thugs working for the coal operators, or what we call gun thugs, and some of the UMW enforcers. I have distant relatives who bombed communist soup kitchens in Evarts, Kentucky in 1931, and story after story of beating after beating was handed out to communist infiltrators, or outsiders, who rushed to Harlan County after May 5, 1931 to join the resistance. Well, it didn't work out too well for them, because the communist unions were preaching their atheistic communist sermons. And in 1931 Harlan County, even the gun thugs believed in Jesus Christ and would shoot you dead on the street if you denounced the church, as the communist unions were commonly doing in Harlan County at that time. The true fact of the matter was the communist unions were working overtime to start a real communist revolution in America, and ground zero was Harlan County, Kentucky. Not to save the coal miner from starvation, which they like to claim, the communist unions opened soup kitchens following the mold of Al Capone in Chicago after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929, when Al Capone fed thousands a day during the height of the Great Depression, not to do good by his fellow man, but to soften his image, because he was about to find out, as history would dictate, he was getting ran out of town. But, and this is another hypocritical but, in the Harlan County Coal Wars, the whole thing from 1911 to 1980 is filled with irony and hypocrites and lies. Before the communists arrived in Harlan County, the miners were starving. The UMW didn't care about the Harlan County coal miner. John L. Lewis abandoned Harlan County. President Hoover, the Red Cross, Governor Sampson, everyone abandoned the Harlan County coal miner. So John L. Lewis is no hero of mine, even though I am still a UMWA man, not a company man. Coming from Harlan County, you have to choose. So by 1931, the situation was about to explode, and it did explode. Violence began in earnest in May of 1931, and with all the remaining UMW organizers and coal miners in jail because of the Battle of Evarts, and that's two battles, one on May 1st, 1931, and one on May 5th, 1931, The communists then moved in, and the authorities blamed the communists for the violence when they had absolutely nothing to do with it. The violence was perpetrated by regular coal miners fighting for their families' lives. They were desperate, and this wasn't political. This was survival. And the authorities, coal companies, the state and federal governments, used the communist tag to convict all Union men in Harlan County. And the communists did move in. It was a perfect opportunity. They had all the publicity they needed, and they had nothing to do with it. The explosion of violence was a result of a desperate situation in Harlan County, mostly in Evarts, Kentucky, one of the only incorporated towns in Harlan County not owned by the coal company.
Back in the days when the United Mine Workers of America was a struggling infant, which growed up to be a giant, there was strikes and more strikes, and there was violence and more violence. One of the most violent mining districts was up in Harlan County in East Kentucky. Everybody was reading the newspaper headlines telling of bloody battles between men who saw things differently. A lot of blood was shed and too many lives were lost. And a reputation growed. The nation became aware that there was a deadly seriousness, that Harlan County miners intended to be organized union workers or to give their lives in the fight. And a lot of them did.
You've heard of bloody battles when Kentucky miners strike and rile the boys from Fulton County all the way to Pike. As famous as all the feuding between the Hatfields and McCoys was the fighting for the Union by the Harlan County boys. Miners came from Perry County, some of them came from Boyd, some of them came from Letcher, and some of them came from Floyd. A lot of them came from Breathitt, and they made a lot of noise, but the fightingest of the Union men were the Harlan County boys.
On May 1st of that year, tension reached a boiling point, where thousands of men and their families had set up camps. Evarts was a refuge, as it was one of the only towns in Harlan County not owned by the coal companies. A machine gun fight with bombings along with burned businesses and homes left parts of Evarts devastated. Sheriff J.H. Blair and his gun thug deputies had struck the first blow, but it will not go unanswered. After the initial battle, residents of Evarts, Kentucky loaded their rifles, pistols, and were reserved for the fight to come. What many didn't realize was this battle to come would change everything. The aftermath of the Battle of Evarts was filled with injustice and tyranny, something residents of Harlan County were used to by this time. Special grand juries were convened, dozens of men rounded up, and a select few would be put on trial for their lives. And it would take years for the accused to find justice. Reading from Bill Bishop's 1976 Southern Exposure column on the Battle of Evarts, 2 days after the shootout, 300 National Guard troops entered Harlan County and camped just outside of Evarts. The troops were called in by Governor Sampson, with the written approval of UMW District President William Turnblazer and International Representative Lawrence Peggy Dyer, under an agreement that the Guard would disarm both miners and company guards. Within days, it became apparent that the Turnblazer-Sampson agreement would not be fulfilled. Blair refused to disarm his deputies, while the troops began to confiscate miners' weapons. As the gun thugs quickly discovered in Harlan County after the Battle of Evarts, the miners did not disarm, and in fact began to stockpile explosives, machine guns for future battles. Instead of massive ambushes like the Battle of Evarts that stunted J.H. Blair and his thugs, future battles were more representative of jungle guerrilla warfare and sabotage. And the men of Harlan County would fight these battles for decades to come.